Welcome back to Indyfest 2021. I'm John Ralston here with my trusty number two, Elizabeth Thompson, to talk about now that focus group of Latino voters. What jumped out at you?
So interesting to me. I really enjoyed that conversation. The thing that jumped out at me right off the top was John's question about, does it really matter to you whether a candidate for office is Latino? Is that going to affect your vote or how you view that candidate? And without exception, the focus group indicated that it doesn't make a difference. That's not how they judge people. It was even specifically said by one focus group participant that it doesn't matter whether they're Latino, Black, Asian, or what have you. What matters is, are they reaching out to Latino voters? Are they talking to us? Are they showing up in the community? So I thought that was really interesting, because we've seen in politics in recent years with all these battles over, identity politics and, whether you should try to run a candidate of the same demographic group that you're trying to appeal to. The answer to that question seems to be no.
It's interesting to me about that, and I was surprised that not one of them said yes to that. Would you be more likely to vote for? Now, you have to take into account that maybe in the back of people's minds, they don't want to come across as being that quote unquote superficial, that they would just vote for the Latino candidate. So I allow for it, but they all gave pretty good reasons as if they had thought about it, right? And it even got me to the point of thinking that maybe some of them have voted in the past against Hispanic candidates who were running. So I picked up on that too. I thought that was the most fascinating thing. What I also think was fascinating, and you're seeing this in polling across the country, and maybe this didn't come across to you, but it did to me, the lack of enthusiasm for Joe Biden. Most of them, maybe all of them voted for Biden, except for Julio, I think wasn't registered. Even the Republican, Renee, voted for Biden, but it wasn't like he's doing a great job. It was more like, oh yeah, he's doing okay. He's doing about what I thought he was going to do. Now again, it's October of his first year in office, but still, there may be a lot of other atmospheric factors, Elizabeth, but the lack of enthusiasm for Joe Biden really struck me.
Yeah, it struck me too, and it's really going to matter here in Nevada, because as we know, there is always a down ticket effect based on who is in the White House and who is higher on the ticket. Now, Joe Biden obviously not on the ticket in 2022, but that doesn't mean that his favorability ratings or otherwise don't have any effect at all. So it really does matter how the leader of the party is doing. And yeah, I think it, again, we're more than a year away from the election, but maybe a little bit of a red flag going up there for those who are looking to rely on the Latino vote for a Democratic candidate. You might have a problem.
It's interesting, too, the question of how law enforcement is perceived, which people have already seen from our poll results, the ones we released and the ones we inadvertently released of the entire cohort. We're a very pro-law enforcement state and not as much concerned as I know a lot of progressives would like, and they're frustrated with criminal justice reform. They don't think it's needed. Across the spectrum here, from an older gentleman, Jose, who had problems just with trying to simple interaction with the police and thought it was because of his heavy accent, to you heard from the younger folks. John said he had experiences with law enforcement. Julio kind of indicated he might have as well. Monica, who was very thoughtful, talked about the lack of trust of police. That is still really embedded in minority communities. People generally like to think of the Black community, but it seems to me in the Hispanic community too.
Yeah, it was clear that most focus group members, it is top of mind for them when they interact with the police to wonder, how am I going to get treated? I thought it was really striking, the comment about this thought of like, well, I hope it's a cool cop.
Yeah.
You know what? If I may, I've actually had that same thought in certain situations when a police officer is approaching me for one reason or another. So I'm not sure this has anything to do with being Latino per se, although that was the question that you asked them. What I found really the most interesting was how nuanced some of their views were, because there were many mentions of training, better training being needed. So we weren't hearing, yes, defund the police, or the police are terrible. We were hearing that with some police there may be a nervousness in interacting with them, but the solution to that is better training and more and different training for the police force. And so I think it's interesting that we heard more nuance from this group than we sometimes hear in public conversations about this issue right now.
It's interesting because you couldn't see the body language, I think, as well as I could, being up close. And you mentioned anyone, I think who's been stopped for speeding or whatever other interaction they have with the police, they hope it's a cool cop as opposed. But I think what's different is the real, like, we're uncomfortable, we might be a little squeamish. There's real fear among minority communities that even simplest interaction with the police could turn deadly. You and I don't really think of it that way. It doesn't mean it couldn't, but we don't think, and you could, that was palpable to me here. Last thing I wanted to talk about real quickly, Elizabeth, is the issue of them being taken for granted. And I think one or two, I think it was two, talked about that in the affirmative when I asked about it, that the Democrats take them for granted. And their willingness, again, maybe they're just wanting to seem open-minded to consider a Republican in certain situations. That's a warning sign for Democrats, I think.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit, although a couple of, or at least one that I remember, a member of the focus group, kind of drilled down a little more specifically. For example, the word amnesty was said out loud, but not by everyone. And there was an acknowledgement that, the border is, a bit of a mess. And I am going to answer your question. Like, this is all kind of tied back to fear and concern in the Latino community somewhat about the way they're perceived, all these different things that are happening in the media that are even bringing it more to the forefront. We're constantly talking about Latinos for one reason or another, right? They tie into all these public policy issues. So I loved the honesty, and it's one thing that's been great in both these groups so far, that how willing I think people are. You're right, they may be a little nervous to say maybe what we might call some really strong phraseology, but you can read between the lines, I think, with some of these comments.
How much of that do you think is the moderator's ability to put them at ease?
Well, I don't know. We'll give you a B+.
B+. All right. That's like the thumb sideways that I asked for. All right. We're going to take a little bit of a break here at Indyfest. We have a great afternoon lined up in about a half an hour with some talented high school students debating a very important environmental issue. Then we're going to have another focus group or two, and then at the end of the day, and we'll get you out of here by mid-afternoon, Nate Silver and I are going to sit down and talk about all kinds of things, maybe even some sports questions, Elizabeth. But before you rush off to your refrigerators or your Uber Eats app, take a look at another video about the Indy. I think that there's a yearning out there at a time when people don't trust the media, don't trust institutions, for unbiased, nonpartisan, deeply reported stories, news that people can trust. I did some research, decided to do a nonprofit. First person I approached was Elizabeth Thompson.
In August of 2016, John Ralston sent me an email and asked me to meet him for dinner and said he had a matter to discuss. It was only a few minutes into that dinner that John told me he wanted to start an independent news site in Nevada covering policy and politics and people. He explained that he was concerned about the direction of media in Nevada.
We're not, just chasing the latest headline, right? We want to make that really relevant to people and really take the time and be thoughtful about explaining these stories to our community and, not being sort of clickbaity, sensationalist headlines, right? But really diving into the policy and trying to understand, what are the long-term impacts to our community beyond sort of the breaking news cycle. And so I think, to me, it's really valuable that the Indy exists in Nevada, because I think we're providing this coverage that no one else is, and in a way that no one else is.
We are very open with our audience, and we try to explain the world to people.
This is like public service journalism, what we're doing. Like, it isn't really offered elsewhere. The level of complexity, the level of detail, the stories we tell, Like, this is truly a public service.
One thing that has been important to John and I from the beginning is making sure that we provide reporting that is completely credible, factual, reliable, and that we are 100% transparent in the way we operate, in the way we report, and in the money that comes into the Nevada Independent. We disclose every single dollar that comes in from a donor, both on a donor page that is fully searchable, but also we name donors in every story in which a donor is named as a subject.
And we're committed to just bringing people the news in a clear and unbiased and informed and in-depth type of way that's not about getting a bunch of clicks. It's about making sure that the public understands a complex issue.